The text message that shattered Melanie Davies's world arrived at 2:17 a.m. It wasn't for her. It was a phantom buzz from the nightstand from her husband Brennan's phone, which he never, ever left behind. Just one line of text glowed on the screen from a name she didn't recognize, Sasha. It read, "Everything's ready. The jet leaves at dawn. Just you and me, my love. Forever. Forever." That one word struck her harder than a physical blow. In the silent, cavernous space of their Park Avenue penthouse, with the city lights twinkling like distant, mocking stars, Melanie felt the floor drop out from beneath her. Her hand instinctively went to her swollen belly, a silent promise to the new life she carried. Her husband was leaving, and she was about to discover he was leaving her with nothing, except a single forgotten document worth more than his entire fortune. Life for Melanie Davies had been a meticulously curated masterpiece. Their penthouse on Park Avenue wasn't just a home. It was a statement with floor-to-ceiling windows that captured the New York City skyline like a living painting. Melanie, an art historian by training, had softened the apartment's modern edges with classical sculptures and impressionist prints, creating a sanctuary of taste and tranquility high above the city's relentless hum. She had met Brennan Davies 6 years ago at a gallery opening. He was electric, a rising star in the tech world, who had just launched Helios, a revolutionary data optimization platform. He wasn't like the other tech giants, brusque, awkward, or arrogant. Brennan was smooth with a disarming smile and a way of listening that made you feel like you were the only person in the universe. He pursued her with a charming, old-fashioned intensity, and she, a quiet academic from a comfortable but unremarkable Boston family, was swept away. Their life together became the stuff of tabloids, weekends in the Hamptons, skiing in Gstad charity galas, where their names were whispered with a mixture of envy and admiration. Melanie had put her career on hold, a decision that seemed natural at the time. Brennan had insisted. "You're my masterpiece now, Melanie," he'd said, kissing her forehead. "Curating our life is a full-time job." And for a while it was enough. She loved him, and she was building a home, a life, a future. The news of her pregnancy 7 months ago had been the final perfect brushstroke on their canvas. Brennan had been ecstatic, or so it seemed. He'd bought her a ridiculous diamond necklace, a push present a little early. He'd laughed and talked endlessly about names, nurseries, and dynasties. He wanted a son to carry on the Davies name, to inherit the empire he was building. The cracks, however, had started to appear about 3 months back. They were hairline fractures, almost invisible to the naked eye. He began working later. His phone became an extension of his hand, angled away from her whenever it lit up. Business trips to Singapore and Zurich became more frequent, and when he returned, he smelled faintly of a perfume that wasn't hers. When she'd asked, he'd laughed it off. "Melanie, darling, it's the airline lounges. They pump that stuff through the vents." He was so convincing, so plausible, that she'd felt ashamed for her flicker of suspicion. The real shift came with the death of Leo Foster. Leo was Brennan's co-founder, the quiet, reclusive genius who had written the original code for Helios, while Brennan was the face of the company, the charismatic salesman who wooed investors. Leo was the engine, the true architect of their success. He was a shy, kind man who had always treated Melanie with a gentle respect that felt different from Brennan's possessive adoration. Leo saw her, not just Brennan's beautiful wife. His sudden heart attack at the age of 42 had shaken the company, but Brennan had seemed to recover with an unsettling speed. "It's a tragedy, of course," Brennan had said, pouring 2 glasses of scotch, But Leo was unstable. He wanted to slow down, focus on philanthropic nonsense. Now we can finally move forward, unhindered. The coldness in his voice had chilled her. In the weeks following Leo's death, Brennan became more distant than ever. The late nights became all-nighters. The business trips were now opaque with vague destinations. The man who once shared every detail of his day now offered only clipped summaries. The laughter that used to fill their home was replaced by a tense silence, broken only by the sterile chime of his phone. Which brought her to tonight. Brennan had claimed he was flying to San Francisco for an emergency investor meeting. He'd kissed her goodbye, his lips cool and distracted, his eyes already looking past her toward the door. "I'll be back Friday, darling. Take care of yourself and our little guy." He'd patted her stomach, a gesture that now felt like a violation. The 2:17 a.m. text message was the earthquake that brought the entire facade crumbling down. "Sasha, the jet leaves at dawn. Just you and me, my love. Forever." Melanie's breath hitched. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. She unlocked his phone. His password, pathetically, was the launch date of his company, and opened the message thread. It was all there. Months of it. A secret life painted in lurid detail. Photos of them in hotel rooms that looked suspiciously like the ones from his business trips. Whispers of love, of a future together, of escaping the gilded cage. He had called her his cage. He had called this woman, Sasha, his freedom. They talked about her, about Melanie. "She's so naive," Brennan had texted 2 weeks ago. "She still thinks I'm going to Lamar's class with her next week." In another, Sasha had written, "Once Leo's estate is settled and the money is yours, we'll be free. Is the pregnant cow still unsuspecting?" The cruelty was surgical. It was designed to eviscerate. Melanie sank to the floor, the plush silk rug feeling like sandpaper against her skin. The nausea that rose in her throat had nothing to do with her pregnancy. She crawled to the walk-in closet, a space larger than her first apartment. His side was half empty. His favorite suits, his travel bag, the watch she'd bought him for their anniversary, all gone. He hadn't just left. He had planned his escape with meticulous precision. He was running away with his mistress, and he was taking the fortune they had built, or rather the fortune Leo had built with him. The life she had curated, the future she was carrying it, had all been a lie. As the first rays of dawn bled over the Manhattan skyline, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the silent penthouse, Melanie Davies wasn't the wife of a millionaire. She was a pregnant woman, utterly alone, abandoned in the ruins of a perfect life that had never really existed, and she had no idea that the worst was yet to come. The first week was a blur of hollowed-out shock. Melanie moved through the opulent penthouse like a ghost, the silence amplifying the frantic monologue in her head. Every object was a monument to her foolishness. The photo of them smiling in Santorini, the cashmere throw he'd wrapped around her on cool evenings, the tiny blue booties sitting on the nursery dresser. It all felt like a movie set for a film in which she was no longer the star. Her calls to Brennan went straight to voicemail. His assistant, a woman who used to be deferential and warm, was now a frosty gatekeeper. "Mr. Davies is unreachable," she'd said, her voice clipped. "All future correspondence should be directed to his legal department." The legal department. That was the first sign. The second, more brutal sign arrived a week later. It was a formal letter, delivered by a courier from a law firm she'd never heard of. The language was cold, sterile, and devastating. It was a notice of divorce proceedings. It cited irreconcilable differences. Attached was a settlement offer that was less an offer and more an insult, a one-time payment of $50,000 and a demand that she vacate the penthouse within 30 days. Her name wasn't even on the lease. The apartment, the cars, the life, it was all owned by a holding company controlled by Brennan. Then came the final blow. She tried to use her credit card to order groceries. Declined. She called the bank. A polite but firm manager informed her that their joint accounts had been frozen and their contents transferred. Brennan had systematically and legally cut her off from everything. He had left her pregnant, homeless and penniless. The $50,000 was a pittance meant to silence her, to make her disappear quietly. Despair was a lead weight in her stomach. She sat on the floor of the half-built nursery, surrounded by unassembled cribs and boxes of designer baby clothes, and she wept. She cried for her lost love, for her naivety, for the child who was about to be born into this chaos. She called her best friend, Nina Sharma, a pragmatic journalist who flew in from Chicago the next day. Nina was a whirlwind of controlled fury. "That absolute monster!" she seethed, pacing the living room. "We're going to fight this, Melanie. We'll get a lawyer. We'll take him to the cleaners." But Melanie knew it wasn't that simple. The prenuptial agreement she'd signed without a second thought was ironclad. She remembered Brennan's lawyer explaining it, his words slick and reassuring. "It's just a formality, a way to protect the company's assets." She had trusted him. In the event of a divorce, she was entitled to almost nothing. Days bled into a week. The 30-day clock was ticking. Melanie started packing, sorting through the remnants of her life. It was while clearing out the home office, a space she rarely used, that she found it. Tucked away at the back of a filing cabinet, behind old tax returns and appliance warranties, was a thick, sealed FedEx envelope. It was addressed to her in a spidery, precise handwriting. She recognized instantly Leo Foster. Her heart skipped a beat. The postmark was from a month before he died. She had a vague memory of him giving it to her one afternoon when Brennan was out. "Keep this for me, Melanie," he'd said. His eyes filled with an unreadable sadness. "Don't open it unless you feel like the world is, well, unless you feel like you really need to. And whatever you do, don't tell Brennan about it." At the time, she'd thought it was an odd, slightly paranoid request from a socially awkward man. She'd put it away and forgotten all about it. Until now. Her hands trembled as she tore open the seal. Inside were 2 documents. The first was a handwritten letter. "My dearest Melanie," it began. "If you are reading this, it means my fears have been realized, and Brennan has shown his true colors. I am so terribly sorry. I saw the darkness in him long ago, a ruthless ambition that overshadowed his brilliance. It's the reason I never married, never had a family of my own. I couldn't risk bringing anyone into his orbit. But you were different. You brought a light to his life I hoped might save him. I see now that it only gave him more to cast in shadow. Brennan believes he is the sole heir to my portion of Helios. He is wrong. He sees the company as a vehicle for his own greed for jets, for women, for a life of excess. I saw it as a legacy, a tool to build something better. He has no idea that months ago I restructured my entire estate, my 50% ownership stake in Helios, my personal investment portfolios, my properties. Everything is held within a private trust, the Foster Legacy Trust. Which brings me to the second document. Please read it carefully with a lawyer. A good one, not one of Brennan's corporate sharks. You are a good person, Melanie. You deserved better. I hope this gives you the means to build a new life for you, and for the child I suspect you will soon be blessed with. Don't let him win. Yours, Leo. With tears blurring her vision, Melanie picked up the second document. It was thick bound in blue cardstock. The title on the front read, Last Will and Testament of Leonard Foster. She wasn't a lawyer, but the language was shockingly clear. She skimmed through the legal jargon until she reached the key articles. Leo had bequeathed a few minor items to distant relatives. He'd left a generous donation to his university's engineering program. But the bulk of his estate, the controlling interest in the Foster Legacy Trust, valued in the document at an estimated $30 million, was not left to Brennan. Instead, the document named Melanie Davies as the sole executor and primary beneficiary of the trust. But there was a condition, a masterstroke of posthumous planning. She would only inherit it all under one of two circumstances, either upon Leo's death if she was no longer married to or had initiated divorce proceedings against Brennan Davies. Melanie had to read it 3 times. The blood rushed in her ears. Brennan hadn't just cut her off from his money. In abandoning her, he had inadvertently handed her the keys to half of his kingdom. He had run off with his mistress to claim a fortune he believed was his, completely unaware that his act of betrayal had just triggered the one clause that would divert that entire fortune, $30 million, directly into the hands of the pregnant wife he had left with nothing. She stood up the letter, and the will clutched in her hand. The despair that had crippled her for weeks began to recede, replaced by a cold, sharp, and unfamiliar feeling. It was anger. It was resolve. It was power. Brennan Davies thought he had destroyed her. He had no idea he had just made her invincible. The fluorescent lights of the law office hummed a stark contrast to the sun-drenched luxury of her former life. The office of Mr. Garrett Cole was not on Park Avenue. It was in a respectable but unassuming building in Midtown, filled with the scent of old books and fresh coffee. Nina had found him through a journalist contact. He was known as a giant killer, a quiet, meticulous lawyer who specialized in complex estate litigation and had a reputation for taking on powerful bullies. Mr. Cole was a man in his late 50s, with kind eyes and a mind like a steel trap. He read through Leo's will and the accompanying letter, twice his face betraying no emotion. Melanie sat opposite him, her hands clasped over her baby bump, feeling a nervous tremor run through her. Finally he looked up, peering at her over his reading glasses. "This is without a doubt the most elegantly drafted fail-safe I have ever seen," he said, a hint of admiration in his voice. "Mr. Foster was a very clever man, and a very prescient one. So it's real, it's legally binding?" Melanie asked, her voice barely a whisper. "It's ironclad," Mr. Cole confirmed. The trust was established offshore, making it incredibly difficult for outside parties, say your husband's aggressive legal team, to challenge. The wording is precise. By serving you with divorce papers, Mr. Davies has unwittingly fulfilled the primary condition of the will. As the named executor, you now have the authority to assume control of the Foster Legacy Trust. And as the primary beneficiary, its assets are for all intents and purposes yours. A wave of relief so profound it left her dizzy washed over Melanie. What does that mean exactly? The $30 million. It means that Leo Foster's 50% stake in Helios, the company your husband believes he now fully controls, belongs to the trust. You control the trust. Therefore, you control 50% of the company, Mr. Cole explained calmly. You are now Mrs. Davies, your husband's silent and equal partner." The irony was staggering. Brennan had discarded her, believing she was a powerless accessory. Now she held a stake in his empire, equal to his own. "What do we do now?" she asked, a newfound strength hardening her voice. "We move quietly and deliberately," Mr. Cole advised. "The first step is for me to file the will with the probate court and formally establish your position as executor. This will be a private filing initially. Brennan won't be notified until we are ready for him to be. The second step is securing your immediate financial situation. The will specifies that the trust's liquid assets are at your disposal. We will arrange a transfer to a new bank account in your name. Only that will be more than sufficient to cover your living expenses and our legal fees." For the first time in weeks, Melanie felt like she could breathe. She wasn't homeless. She wasn't destitute. She had resources. "There's something else," Mr. Cole said, leaning forward. "Leo included a provision. The trust grants you his proxy votes on the board of Helios. You don't have to be physically present. You can exercise his full voting power on any corporate matter." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Your husband is likely planning to leverage his supposed 100% control to make significant changes. Perhaps sell the company, take on massive debt, or merge with a competitor. He will be in for a rude awakening when he discovers his vote is only half the equation." Meanwhile, thousands of miles away in the Cayman Islands, Brennan Davies and Sasha Petrova were living in a bubble of sun-drenched bliss. They occupied a sprawling beachfront villa, paid for by a corporate account. Their days were a hedonistic cycle of champagne breakfasts, yacht excursions, and decadent dinners. "Did you hear back from the lawyers?" Sasha asked one afternoon, draping herself over Brennan as he checked his laptop by the infinity pool. She was stunningly beautiful, with the sharp, intelligent eyes of a predator. "Just the usual," Brennan said, scrolling dismissively. "Melanie's lawyer will probably make some noise, but the prenup is airtight. We offered her 50 grand. She'll take it and crawl back to whatever drab life she came from." "And Leo's estate," Sasha pressed her fingers, tracing the muscles on his back. "When will that be settled?" "Soon," Brennan said with a confident smirk. "It's all going through probate. My lawyers say it's a formality. Another 30 million in the pot. Then, my love, we can really start living. I'm already in talks to acquire a smaller tech firm, a competitor. It's a hostile takeover. Leo was always too sentimental to do it. With full control, I can do whatever I want." He kissed her, blissfully unaware of the legal gears turning back in New York. He saw himself as a king who had just secured his kingdom, ignorant of the fact that the queen he'd just exiled now held the power to topple his throne. Back in New York, Melanie made her first move. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a thunderous declaration of war. It was quiet, strategic, and deeply personal. She moved out of the Park Avenue penthouse, leaving behind the ghosts of her old life. She didn't fight the eviction. She simply left. She found a beautiful, spacious brownstone to rent in Brooklyn Heights, a place with a garden and warm, sunlit rooms perfect for a nursery. With the initial funds transferred from the trust, she hired an obstetrician, a doula, and a financial advisor. She began building a fortress not of glass and steel, but of security and independence. She also started studying. Mr. Cole sent her every file on Helios financial reports, board meeting minutes, investment summaries. She spent her nights not weeping over her husband's betrayal, but learning the language of his world. She read about data optimization, market caps, and venture capital. She absorbed every detail about the company Leo had built, and Brennan was now steering toward a cliff. Her first act as a controlling partner was subtle. She noticed a line item in the corporate expenses, a monthly lease of $150,000 for a villa in the Cayman Islands. Through Mr. Cole, she exercised her authority as a 50% stakeholder to flag the expense as non-essential and subject to board review. In the Caymans, Brennan received a terse email from his finance department. The payment for the villa had been suspended pending a shareholder audit. He stared at the screen, baffled. A shareholder audit. He was the shareholder. It had to be a bureaucratic mix-up. A ghost in the machine left over from Leo's cautious management style. He fired off an angry reply, ordering them to process the payment immediately. He didn't get a response. A day later, the property manager for the villa informed him his lease had been terminated due to non-payment. They had 24 hours to vacate. Brennan was furious, but not yet alarmed. He saw it as an annoyance, a logistical headache. He booked a suite at a luxury hotel, grumbling about incompetent staff. He still had no idea who had signed the order. He couldn't possibly imagine that the wife he thought was destitute and weeping in New York was at that very moment sitting in a sunlit brownstone, sipping chamomile tea, and quietly beginning to dismantle his world. The first tremor of genuine alarm hit Brennan Davies, not in the form of an eviction, but an official, non-negotiable legal summons. It arrived via a stern-faced courier at his 5-star hotel suite in Grand Cayman, interrupting a heated phone call in which he was berating his chief financial officer. "What do you mean you can't push the acquisition through?" he snarled into his phone. "I control the company. My vote is all that matters." "That's just it, Brennan," the CFO. A man named Robert stammered on the other end. "It appears you don't. The lawyers for Leo Foster's estate have filed his will. His entire stake, all of his voting shares, have been transferred to a trust. We've just been notified." Brennan went cold. "A trust? What trust?" "He told me I was his sole heir." "The Foster Legacy Trust," Robert said, his voice strained. "And according to the legal notice, the sole executor and beneficiary is Melanie Davies." The phone slipped from Brennan's hand and clattered onto the marble floor. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. Melanie. It was impossible. A mistake. A forgery. The quiet, compliant art historian he had married and discarded couldn't possibly be at the center of this. He picked up the legal summons. It was from the board of Helios, formally notifying him of an emergency shareholders meeting in New York. His presence was mandatory. The notice was signed by the legal representatives for both majority shareholders Brennan Davies and the Foster Legacy Trust. "He's coming back," Melanie said, looking at Mr. Cole across the polished surface of his conference table. Her voice was steady, her demeanor calm. The past few weeks had transformed her. The victimized wife was gone, replaced by a composed, focused woman who moved with a newfound purpose. Her pregnancy was more pronounced now, a constant reminder of what and who she was fighting for. "He will be furious, Mr. Cole warned. "He will try to intimidate you. He will threaten, cajole, and manipulate. You must be prepared." "I know who he is now," Melanie replied, her hand resting on her stomach. "I'm not afraid of him anymore." Brennan arrived in New York like a thundercloud, leaving Sasha behind in the Caymans with a string of promises and a platinum credit card. He stormed into the Helios headquarters, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that he considered his monument, and went straight to the penthouse he had once shared with Melanie. He used his old key. It didn't work. The locks had been changed. A security guard politely informed him that the property was under new tenancy and that he was trespassing. Seething, he went to a hotel and called Melanie. She answered on the second ring. "Melanie, what the hell is going on?" he demanded, his voice a low growl. "What is this game you're playing?" "It's not a game, Brennan," she replied, her voice cool and unfamiliar to his ears. It lacked the warmth, the deference he was so used to. "It's the execution of a legally binding document. I suggest you have your lawyer explain it to you." "A document? You forged it. You and that pathetic ghost, Leo. You conspired against me. Leo was your partner, Brennan, the man whose genius you built your fortune on. He simply took measures to protect his legacy from you. It turns out he was right to do so," she said. He tried a different tack, his voice softening into the persuasive purr he had used so many times before. "Melanie, listen to me. Darling, you don't understand this world. Corporate law, hostile takeovers, it's complicated. You're pregnant. You should be resting, not dealing with this stress. Let me handle it. We can work something out. I'll increase the settlement. Significantly. Just sign the trust over to me." It was the same condescending tone he'd always used, the one that implied she was a fragile doll to be protected from the real world. This time it didn't soothe her. It ignited a cold fire in her veins. "The time for you to handle things is over, Brennan," she said, her voice like ice. "I'll see you at the board meeting on Friday. Please have your lawyer present. Goodbye." She hung up before he could respond. Brennan stared at his phone in disbelief. Who was this person? This was not the woman he had left. The prey he had abandoned in the wilderness had somehow impossibly learned to hunt. The confrontation came 2 days before the board meeting. He cornered her outside her new brownstone in Brooklyn Heights as she was returning from a doctor's appointment. He looked haggard, his designer suit rumpled his usual confident swagger, replaced by a frantic, desperate energy. "Melanie, we need to talk," he said, blocking her path. "We have nothing to talk about outside of a boardroom," she said, trying to step around him. He grabbed her arm. It wasn't violent, but it was firm, a gesture of ownership. "Don't you walk away from me. I made you. You were a nobody before you met me. I gave you everything." She met his furious gaze without flinching. "You gave me a role to play in your life, Brennan. I was an accessory, something to be admired and then discarded when you found a newer model. Leo, on the other hand, gave me an opportunity. He gave me the power to protect his legacy and to build a future for my child." "Your child?" she added, her eyes dropping meaningfully to her belly. His face contorted. "This is about money, isn't it? You're just like all the rest." "No," she said, pulling her arm free. "This is about accountability. You and I are finished, Brennan. But you are still the father of this baby. And Helios is this baby's birthright, built on the work of a man you betrayed. I will not let you gamble it away on yachts and mistresses and reckless acquisitions." He let out a harsh, disbelieving laugh. "You think you can stop me? You an art historian. You're going to come into my boardroom and tell me how to run my company." "It's not just your company anymore," she said, unlocking her front door. "It's our company. You should get used to that. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have financials to review." She closed the door behind her, leaving him standing on the pavement, sputtering in impotent rage. He had come back to New York, expecting to swat away a nuisance to bully his timid wife into submission. Instead, he had come face to face with a stranger. The predator had stalked his prey back to its den, only to find it was no longer a den, but a fortress, and the prey was looking back at him with the eyes of an equal. The balance of power had irrevocably shifted, and he was just beginning to understand how badly he had been outplayed. While Brennan was crashing against the wall of Melanie's newfound resolve in New York, Sasha Petrova was growing impatient in the Cayman Islands. The flow of easy money had suddenly become a trickle. The platinum card Brennan had left her was declined at a high-end jewelry store. Her calls to him were increasingly frantic, met with distracted, angry reassurances. "It's a temporary cash flow problem, Sasha, a legal mix-up. I'm handling it," he'd barked during their last call. Sasha was no fool. She wasn't just a beautiful distraction. She was a former analyst at a rival tech firm, a woman with a sharp, calculating mind who had been systematically feeding Brennan information for over a year. Their affair wasn't just passion, it was a strategic partnership. She saw Brennan as her ticket to the top, a powerful man whose only weakness was his ego, a weakness she was more than happy to exploit. The sudden appearance of a legal mix-up involving his pregnant ex-wife was a variable she hadn't accounted for, and she despised unaccounted-for variables. She didn't wait for Brennan to handle it. She began her own investigation. Using her old contacts and her considerable skills in corporate espionage, she started digging into the estate of Leo Foster. It didn't take her long to uncover the publicly filed probate documents. When she read the details of the will, a slow, cold smile spread across her face. It wasn't one of amusement, but of grudging respect for a dead man's cunning, followed by the immediate calculation of her next move. She realized Brennan's approach, brute force and intimidation, was doomed to fail. He was trying to fight his ex-wife on a battlefield where she now held all the strategic high ground. Sasha knew she needed a different weapon information. She needed to find a weakness, a crack in Melanie's armor, something she could use as leverage. Her search led her down a rabbit hole of Melanie's past. She was looking for scandal, for secrets, for anything that could be used to discredit her. She found nothing. Melanie's life was maddeningly clean. A distinguished academic record, a quiet family life, a spotless reputation in the art world. But then Sasha shifted her focus. She wasn't looking for a way to attack Melanie directly, but a way to invalidate the will itself. She hired a private investigator in New York, a discreet and expensive operative with a single directive: find anything that could suggest Leo Foster was not of sound mind when he wrote his will, or that Melanie had exerted undue influence over him. While the investigator went to work, Sasha played her part. She flew to New York, not to a luxury hotel, but to a modest rental. She called Brennan, her voice filled with manufactured concern and love. "Brennan, my love. I was so worried. I had to be here for you," she cooed. "Don't worry about me. I'm here to support you. We'll fight this together." Brennan, his ego bruised and his confidence shaken by his encounter with Melanie, was pathetically grateful. He saw Sasha's arrival as a sign of her unwavering loyalty. He brought her into his inner circle, complaining bitterly about Melanie's betrayal and Leo's treachery. He showed her the company financials, the plans for his hostile takeover, everything. Sasha listened patiently, absorbing every detail, all while secretly plotting her own endgame. The private investigator delivered a bombshell a few days later. While he found no evidence of mental incompetence on Leo's part, he did find something else. Leo, a deeply private man, had been a regular visitor to a specific wing of a private hospital in the months before his death. It wasn't the cardiac unit. It was a renowned and discreet oncology clinic. The investigator had managed to bribe a clerk for a glimpse at his file. Leo Foster had been diagnosed with a highly aggressive terminal brain tumor. He had been given 6 months to live. His sudden heart attack had simply beaten the cancer to the finish line. But the most crucial detail was this: he had kept his diagnosis a complete secret from everyone, including Brennan. However, the visitor logs for the clinic showed one recurring name during his treatment appointments: Melanie Davies. Sasha's eyes lit up. This was it. This was the leverage she needed. Melanie knew about Leo's terminal illness. Brennan did not. Sasha immediately formulated a new narrative, a poisonous story she could plant in Brennan's mind. It was a masterpiece of manipulation. She met Brennan at his hotel bar, her expression a perfect mask of sorrow and reluctant revelation. "Darling," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "There's something I found out, something you need to know about Leo and Melanie." She laid it all out for him, twisting the facts into a damning indictment. "She knew he was dying, Brennan. She was visiting him at the cancer clinic behind your back. He was vulnerable, his mind clouded by his illness and medication. She preyed on him. She isolated him from you and convinced the poor dying man to write her into his will. This wasn't Leo protecting his legacy. This was a cold, calculated plot by your wife to steal your company from under you." The poison took root instantly. Brennan's confusion and rage finally had a target. It all made sense to him now. Melanie's sudden strength, her knowledge, her refusal to back down. In his mind, she was no longer just an ungrateful ex-wife. She was a master manipulator, a black widow who had conspired with his dying partner. "I'll destroy her," he whispered, his knuckles white as he gripped his glass. "I'll expose her in front of the entire board. She won't just lose the company. She'll lose everything." Sasha placed a comforting hand on her mind, already racing 5 steps ahead. By turning Brennan into a guided missile of righteous fury aimed at Melanie, she could create chaos. During the board meeting, while they were busy destroying each other, the company's stock would become unstable. Key investors would get nervous. And in the ensuing turmoil, a third party, perhaps a competitor being quietly fed information by a certain well-placed analyst, could swoop in and pick up the pieces. Sasha didn't just want a piece of Brennan's pie. She wanted to burn the whole bakery down and be the only one left to sell the ashes. The Mistress's gambit was in play. She had handed Brennan the knife and pointed him toward his wife's back, all while positioning herself to inherit the kingdom once they had both bled out. The boardroom on Friday wasn't just going to be a battle, it was going to be a slaughter, and Sasha Petrova intended to be the only survivor. The Helios boardroom was on the 50th floor, a sterile, intimidating space encased in glass with a panoramic view of Manhattan that seemed to put the entire world at your feet. A long obsidian table reflected the grim faces of the board members, a collection of venture capitalists and industry veterans who looked deeply uncomfortable. They had been summoned to witness a war between the company's 2 founders, or rather the founder and his dead partner's proxy. Brennan sat at the head of the table, radiating a tense, predatory energy. He was impeccably dressed, his armor for the day. Beside him, slightly in the background, sat Sasha Petrova in the designated guest chair, a picture of supportive concern. Her presence was a calculated provocation. The doors opened and Melanie entered. All eyes turned to her. She was not the weeping, broken woman they might have imagined. She was dressed in a simple but elegant navy maternity dress, her hair pulled back neatly. She moved with a quiet confidence that filled the room. Beside her was the unflappable Mr. Garrett Cole, carrying a worn leather briefcase. Melanie took the seat opposite Brennan, the seat that had always been Leo's. The symbolism was lost on no one. Brennan began, his voice dripping with condescension. "Thank you all for coming. I know this is an unusual situation. We are here today to address a spurious and frankly delusional claim made against this company by my soon-to-be ex-wife." He launched into a prepared speech painting Melanie as a greedy, opportunistic woman who was trying to exploit a personal tragedy for financial gain. He talked about her modest background and how he had given her everything. Melanie listened without expression, her hands resting calmly on the table. When he was finished, the chairman of the board, a stoic man named Paulson, turned to her. "Mrs. Davies, do you have a response?" "I do," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Mr. Davies's personal feelings about our marriage are irrelevant to this board. What is relevant is the legal status of Helios Incorporated, and the legal fact is that the Foster Legacy Trust, which I control, owns 50% of this company. This is not a claim. It is a matter of settled law." Mr. Cole slid a document across the table to Paulson. "The certified probate court order for your records." Brennan sneered. "A document she obtained through manipulation and deceit." He stood up, his voice rising with theatrical fury. "What she hasn't told you is that she was secretly meeting with my partner, Leo Foster, in the final months of his life. She discovered he was suffering from a terminal illness, a fact he kept from me, his best friend. She used his weakened state, his clouded judgment, to coerce him into signing over his entire fortune to her." A murmur went through the room. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. Sasha watched Brennan, a flicker of satisfaction in her eyes. The missile had launched. Paulson turned to Melanie, his expression troubled. "Mrs. Davies, is this true? Did you know about Mr. Foster's illness?" This was the moment. The attack Sasha had engineered. Melanie met Paulson's gaze, then looked directly at Brennan. "Yes," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I did." Brennan slammed his hand on the table. "Aha! You see, she admits it. She's a parasite, a predator who preyed on a dying man." "Let her finish, Brennan," Paulson said sharply. Melanie took a deep breath. "Leo didn't tell me about his diagnosis at first. He asked me to accompany him to a few hospital appointments under the guise of it being for his heart condition. He said he didn't want to worry Brennan, who was in the middle of a crucial funding round. But I saw how tired he was, how much bun he was in. Eventually he confessed the truth. He had a glioblastoma. He had months at best." Tears welled in her eyes, but she did not let them fall. "He swore me to secrecy, not because he was of unsound mind, but because he knew Brennan. He knew if Brennan found out he was dying, he would immediately see it as a business opportunity. He would try to force Leo out to buy his shares at a reduced price. Leo didn't want his last months to be a battle with the man he once considered a brother." She then turned her attention to the rest of the board. Leo's mind was sharper than ever. In fact, his diagnosis gave him a profound clarity. He saw the reckless path Brennan was taking Helios down, the excessive spending, the egotistical acquisition plans, the complete disregard for the company's original mission. "This will learn her," she said, gesturing to the papers in front of Mr. Cole, "was not an act of a man whose judgment was clouded. It was the last, most brilliant act of a genius protecting his life's work from the one man he knew would destroy it." Her words hung in the air, filled with a conviction that was impossible to fake. Brennan was momentarily stunned into silence. Melanie pressed her advantage. "Speaking of reckless spending," she said, as Mr. Cole distributed a new set of folders to the board members. "This is a summary of corporate expenditures for the last quarter, which I, as a majority shareholder, have audited." The folder detailed the Cayman Villa luxury car, Lisa's exorbitant travel for non-company personnel, all under Sasha Petrova's name, and most damningly a series of high-risk, unauthorized preliminary investments related to the hostile takeover Brennan was planning. It was a clear picture of a man using company funds as his personal piggy bank. And as for the acquisition of Innovate Dynamics, Melanie continued, her voice like steel, a move Mr. Davies intended to fund by leveraging the full assets of this company, including the half he wrongly assumed was his. I have discovered that the lead analyst pushing for this acquisition at the target company, the one feeding Mr. Davies' proprietary data, has a very familiar name. She looked directly at Sasha. Sasha Petrova, a former employee of a chief competitor fired under suspicion of corporate espionage. She has been playing you, Brennan, feeding your ego, encouraging your recklessness, all while positioning her old allies to pick up the pieces when you inevitably bankrupted Helios. Sasha's face went white. Brennan spun around to look at her, his face a mask of confusion and dawning horror. "That's a lie," Sasha stammered, but the accusation combined with the evidence of her lavish spending had already done its damage. Melanie delivered the final killing blow. "The board should also know that last week I was approached by representatives from Omnicorp. Omnicorp was their biggest competitor, a titan in the industry. They presented me with a generous offer to buy out my 50% stake in Helios. It would have made me a very wealthy woman and allowed me to walk away from all of this." Brennan stared at her aghast. "I refused," Melanie said. "I refused because Leo did not entrust me with his company, so I could sell it to the highest bidder. He entrusted it to me, so I would protect it. Therefore, as the holder of 50% of the voting shares of this company, I am now putting forth two motions. First, an immediate and independent forensic audit of all executive accounts, and second, a vote of no confidence in the current CEO, Brennan Davies." The room was utterly silent. Brennan looked around at the faces of the board members, faces that had minutes ago been sympathetic to him. He now saw only cold, hard judgment. He looked at Sasha, who was already gathering her purse, her face a carefully constructed neutral mask that didn't quite hide her panic. He looked at Melanie, his pregnant wife, who had not raised her voice, had not screamed or cried, but had simply and methodically dismantled his entire world with the truth. He had walked into the boardroom, a king ready to crush a rebellion. He would walk out a pariah stripped of his power, his reputation and his credibility. Defeated not by a hostile takeover or a market crash, but by the quiet, unshakable strength of the woman he had so foolishly underestimated. The fallout from the board meeting was swift and brutal. The forensic audit uncovered years of financial misconduct by Brennan, using Helios as his personal slush fund. Faced with the threat of legal action from the board and potential criminal charges for fraud, Brennan had no choice but to resign in disgrace. His golden parachute was rescinded, and he was forced into a settlement that left him with a fraction of his former wealth and a reputation that was utterly toxic in the tech world. Sasha Petrova vanished. The moment her scheme was exposed, she liquidated what assets she could and disappeared, leaving Brennan to face the consequences alone. He tried to call her, but her number was disconnected. She had been a parasite, and with the host dying, she had simply moved on to find another. The story became a sensation in the financial press. The Helios coup, they called it. How a pregnant heiress, saved a tech giant from its own founder. Melanie, however, refused all interviews. She had not done this for fame or for revenge. She had done it out of a sense of duty to Leo and a fierce, primal need to protect her child's future. In the months that followed, Melanie, with the guidance of Mr. Cole and a newly appointed responsible board, worked to stabilize Helios. She didn't take over as CEO. She knew her strengths. Instead, she helped install a competent, ethical leader who shared Leo's original vision for the company. Acting as the guardian of the Foster Legacy Trust, she became the quiet, guiding conscience of the company, ensuring it prioritized innovation and integrity over ego and excess. She sold the Park Avenue penthouse and the Hamptons estate, severing the last ties to the life she had shared with Brennan. She remained in her Brooklyn brownstone, finding a quiet joy in its sunlit rooms and peaceful garden. Her friend Nina was a constant presence, a source of unwavering support and cynical humor that kept her grounded. 6 weeks after the boardroom showdown, Melanie gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She named him Leo. Holding her son in her arms for the first time, looking down at his tiny, perfect face, Melanie felt a wave of peace she hadn't thought possible. All the anger, the betrayal, the heartbreak, it all faded into the background, replaced by an overwhelming love for this new life. He was not a product of Brennan's ambition or a symbol of her pain. He was her son, a new beginning, a legacy of his own. Brennan made one final attempt to contact her. A letter arrived penned in his familiar, arrogant script. It was a pathetic plea, a mix of self-pity and veiled threats, demanding parental rights and a share of the boy's inheritance. Melanie had Mr. Cole handle it. A generous child support trust was established, accessible only for the boy's direct needs and managed by a third party. Brennan would have no control. Supervised visitation rights were offered, contingent on a psychological evaluation. He never replied. The humiliation was too much for his ego to bear. He faded from their lives, a ghost of a man who had traded a family and a kingdom for a fleeting affair and an empty victory. Melanie didn't use the $30 million fortune to build a life of idle luxury. Instead, she honored the man who had made it all possible. She established the Foster Foundation, a major philanthropic organization dedicated to funding STEM education for underprivileged students and providing grants for ethical tech startups, the philanthropic nonsense Brennan had once scorned. Her life was no longer a curated masterpiece of someone else's design. It was her own creation, built not on glass and steel, but on resilience, integrity, and love. Sometimes in the quiet of the evening while rocking baby Leo to sleep, she would look out at the distant lights of Manhattan, the city where she had lost everything and gained so much more. She was no longer just Melanie Davies, the abandoned wife. She was Melanie Foster Davies, a mother, a philanthropist, the guardian of a legacy and the architect of her own destiny. She had faced the ruins of her life, and from the rubble had built an empire of her own. From the glittering heights of Park Avenue to the cold reality of betrayal. Melanie's story is a powerful testament to the hidden strength that lies within us all. She was left with nothing but the promise of a new life growing inside her, and a secret left behind by a true friend. She transformed herself from a victim of a cruel husband into the master of her own fate, proving that true power isn't about the money you have, but the integrity you refuse to lose. Her journey wasn't about revenge. It was about rebuilding, about honoring a legacy, and about creating a secure future for her child. It's a raw, real-life drama that shows us that sometimes hitting rock bottom is the first step to building a foundation for a better life. What would you have done in her position? Could you find that strength in the face of such a devastating betrayal? If Melanie's incredible story of resilience and empowerment moved you, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own strength, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable real-life stories. Click the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for listening.